our colors in this painting, we'll basically be using just a couple different variations on the primary colors. And I listed here every single color I believe I use in this collection of 5 paintings. So you really don't have to have the exact same colors that I do to be successful in this painting. So I'll just run through them and talk a little bit about, very briefly, where I use them and some alternates if you don't have them. So first is Hansa Yellow Medium. This is a pretty critical color, so you'll want something as close to that as you can get, because this one will make super duper vibrant mixtures of super bright greens and very vibrant slightly green yellows with our phthalo blue green shade. Quinacridone Gold I used a lot in these paintings just to help bring in that element of slightly orange leaning, but not 100% orange. If you don't have quinacridone gold, then you could certainly just take your whatever yellow you have and mix it with some red to make some oranges. We can do a little demo of that together if you want. So again, if you don't have that gold, you could just add a little bit of red or rose to your yellow, and you'll be able to get something similar-ish orangey space. So you can see there's a nice little alternative. And the more red you add, the more orangey it will get in appearance. And depending on whether you use red like I did there, or if you use like a rosy pink color, you'll get a couple different variations on the orange space. So totally up to you how you want to choose to use those different colors. Again, not 100% required. And you also don't have to have burnt orange. I used it as a shortcut color for adding some orange in only one of the paintings. Again, you could always just add more of your red or your pink to your yellow mixture, and that will get you something that's close enough. And you can play with those mixtures and see whichever one you like better. Maybe it's the more pinky version, maybe you have a bit more of the red in there. There's lots of good options in terms of how to be able to create colors akin to those for our landscape. Next up, we've already seen both of these very briefly here, Quinacridone Rose and Perlene Red. These both really do the same exact things in these paintings. The effect that I use them for is adding that little bit of reddish, orangish color and hint into some of my paintings. So really either one will work. And next up are our 2 reddish colors here. So we have Quinacridone Rose and Perlene Red. Honestly, you could probably just use one or the other or something similar-ish to both of these. I really only use these in the paintings to add the slightly lovely reddish or pinkish effects to parts of the landscapes. And you can see that in areas like right back here, I use some red or pink, and the same thing right here. So probably you get very similar results depending on which color you ended up using. So no requirement to follow exactly as I go there if you don't have those exact colors. Then the blues here I used a lot. Some of that was just for ease of painting. Some of it was I had a ton of fun playing with my cerulean blue chromium. The chromium version is just a little bit more green leaning than the typical cerulean blue. If you don't have that color, which is a heavily granulating color, you could likely get quite close just using some of your cobalt blue, then adding in, oh, I had some green in there. Oopsie, so we'll use our cobalt blue, and if we added a little bit of our phthalo blue green shade to our cobalt, I bet that will get us quite close in terms of how that color looks. It'll behave a wee bit differently, but you can see that color is going to be very, very similar. Again, if we combine our cobalt and our phthalo blue green shade. So again, you don't have to have the exact colors that I do. With that little overview done, now we get to start playing with some of the fun stuff. And one of the mixtures that I use time and time again inside of this painting is going to be our Hansa Yellow Medium combined with varying degrees of our phthalo blue green shade. If we add just a teeny tiny bit of our phthalo blue green shade, we get this incredibly vibrant, very, very still yellowish green color. And that's one that I use a fair bit, especially on the upper edges of some of my foliage. As we progressively add a tiny bit more and then a tiny bit more of that phthalo blue green shade, you can get a whole spectrum of super bright, amazing, brilliantly saturated greens that will really just span a whole beautiful option from, again, that more yellowy area all the way up to, as we keep adding it, it'll slide into this almost highlighter green right here. So there in the middle is a slight highlighter green, and then we can keep going and we go almost into this like very dark, beautiful, almost a teal blue color. So there's the possibilities for our Hansa Yellow Medium, and I will use that a lot in this painting. It's just a very effective way you can see in many of these areas to get that incredibly brilliant, bright spring green for willows or other foliage. So I love that as an option to have. With that said, sometimes this mixture is a little bit too crazy. So if I end up in a space like this right here, let's say, and maybe that's feeling a little bit too just like interesting and vibrant, one of the ways that I address trying to tone down that color is just by integrating some gold into that mixture, or even, as you'll see somewhat in our techniques section, not being afraid just to let some blending happen on our page. So I might have an area of wet pigment like this, then to that I'll take a stripe or add an area basically of my gold. So that way we retain some of the original really vibrant color, but then we also get some of that on-page mixing that can create some really interesting options. You can also do the same thing with a reddish addition, and you can have the red be straight red, or you can combine the red with a little bit of your yellow and your blue to make a slight brownish color. Many different approaches there, but you can always drop in some of the more reddish color too, and just see how that then impacts your painting. And maybe you look at that and like, hey, maybe that area there actually needs some cobalt blue at the bottom. Maybe I want it to be grayer so that you can drop some more colors in. So I'm really relying, and again, we'll practice more of this soon, but we are relying on some of this on the page blending just to have some areas of really high vibrance colors and some areas where that mixing dulls down the colors a little bit more to help us in that space. Similar to these greens over here, I also spend some time working with our cobalt blue combined with various greens or various yellows. So if we have our cobalt blue and we combine that with Hansa yellow medium, we're actually going to get a very different greenish yellow color than we did when we used our phthalo blue green shade. That's because cobalt blue is a really different green. So it may look a little bit similar, but it's going to be just a little bit, to me it feels a bit more opaque, even though it's still a transparent mixture. But it's a little bit more dull, a little bit more subdued, possibly a little bit more natural for certain elements of our landscape. So that's where the cobalt and the Hansa yellow medium can come into play in some of these paintings to give this little bit more slightly dulled down, a little bit more controlled color. And then of course, if you want even more slightly dulled color, you can go with your quinacridone gold and combine that with the cobalt blue, and then that will be even more in a duller green space. So really, and I like to show this because even though these colors are all somewhat similar, by changing up the blues and the yellows, we really have this amazingly large option and spread of colors that we can create with just a handful of blues and yellows and greens. And then in addition to the green side of things, like these more vibrant greens, I do spend a fair bit of time exploring and using my quinacridone gold. Again, we have some options here to mix that if you don't have it. But the quinacridone gold used in higher concentrations like this, with just a little bit of maybe our phthalo blue green shade, is going to make a very, very stunning bright green. But again, very, very different from the bright greens up here. And maybe for some parts of my paintings, this style of green is more appropriate or more of interest than the one up here. And I choose those by just looking at the scene and deciding, okay, one, where possibly are some of my focal points, and very often I will save this super high saturation, overly vibrant green for the focal areas of our painting, and then I'll use the more subdued ones. Like this line right here is mostly Hansa yellow medium, a tiny bit of phthalo blue green shade. This darker area back here is going to be our cobalt with, I think, maybe a little bit of gold and Hansa yellow medium. So you can see that color contrast is also very key to a scene like this where we have just all greens everywhere. So I'm really not afraid to pull out some of the colors and accentuate possibly this bright green more than what we see in our landscape, just so that way in my painting it reads as two different layers and two different types of tree. The same thing happens in this scene here, where I will start with a diluted version of this green here and this green here, then add in some gold right in here, and then add in some gold here, and let some of that wet and wet blending happen, as well as overlaying some darker colors on top, such as taking that cerulean blue and dropping that into that mixture as we see it. Cerulean blue will also make some really stunning greens. You can see there I had a little bit of gold or Hansa yellow medium in there, so let's try gold first. And I sometimes forget about this one as a green mixture, but it does make just lovely stunning greens. And again, these paintings, as you can see how similar all these colors are, really if you use different colors, it'll still read well as the landscape, especially as long as we're paying attention to some of the more slight color shifts, like having more gold or orange down here, and then having more areas of lighter or more vibrant colors than some areas of darker. So don't get too stressed out about it, just enjoy the ride, have fun, play with your colors. I also, in some places in this painting, to make the brownish colors, you can already see we have a mixture here. Our quinacridone gold and our perylene red are going to make a really lovely browny orange color right there. Similarly, if we take our quinacridone rose and then add a little bit of Let's add some quinacridone gold to that. So now we can have this brilliant orange color. And oftentimes, if I end up with an orange, or even if I have an orange color that's feeling too overly vibrant, like that one way to address that is to add the third missing primary. So here, if we start with our rose and our gold, and I like that color is not really where it needs to be, then I can come through and I can add some cobalt blue. And you can see that the addition of that cobalt blue will take that color out of the super bright highlighter primary space, and it will swing it into a more subdued color. And I do that in a number of places in these paintings, especially for some of the dark colors. These are going to be combinations of 3 different or even 4 different colors, where we have our dark blue, we have some yellow, and some of the red. And we could even mix one of those dark colors. I believe that one I just showed you is likely our phthalo blue green shade combined with some quinacridone gold, if I recall correctly, and then some perylene red. And those 3 together are going to make, if I had too much yellow, you can see how it's staying in this greenish space. So I wanted to swing it out of the greenish space. I just add more red, then we can get a more, really almost a black, basically. And that's a really fun option to play with. And then if I add more blue to that, then it'll swing it back into a bluish greenish space, but still a really interesting color. So lots of different options there. And I'm also not afraid to have some areas where maybe if I have rose in this mix now just for fun, you can see how the rose takes it into this really beautiful, like deep, dark, almost black purple color. If I add some more water, that color we can see it a little bit better. There we go. It's a stunning color. It's fun because when we have and this has both red and rose, but either one works quite well, especially the rose, some of that purple will still show through in some of these paintings. And I just love the effect of that, whether it's there a little bit more transparently, or here we can have these really dark blacks that still have a slight purple or reddish cast to them. In this painting, you will also, in a few areas, see me using my white gouache. That's going to be this opaque pigment, right? You can't see it, but that's what it looks like up there, is that white color. And I use that especially in my skies. You can see that I had some of this leftover color over here. And when mixed with the white, it's going to make just these really, really glorious, interesting, opaque mixtures for your sky. Like if I take the white and I mix it with a cerulean, we're going to get a really lovely, different looking blue than what we would have gotten if I just stuck with my normal plain cerulean up at the top of the page. So primarily I use the white in the sky. It will also show up in a couple areas where maybe I add the white with some indanthrone blue, and those end up being maybe even a little bit of gold, I think sometimes added in there. This gets used in some of the distant hillsides just to give a little bit of opacity and just a different visual feel to those distant hills. If you don't have it, please do not stress. Just do your best to approximate that color, and you can definitely have, I'm thinking in these zones back here where I had some of the white in there, and that sky has some white in it. You can get a really close approximation just by doing a transparent layer of color. But if you have it, it can be really fun to play with. I do also use it, in this painting especially, I use that white in a couple areas, actually in conjunction with some of my yellows and greens, because if we take our white to start, and we add to that some quinacridone gold, all of a sudden that gold, again, has a really, really different character. And if we start adding a little bit of our green to that, or we start adding a little bit of blue, then we get a green. And you can see how just crazy different, that's going to be phthalo blue green shade plus quinacridone gold. And we saw that same mixture over here, I believe in this corner, or maybe, I think that was that one. There's so many mixtures going, but very, very different feel, right? It's a completely different color because of the addition of that opacity. And you can see if we add even more blue, that opacity becomes even more pronounced. So I don't use it in every painting, but if you'd like to play with it, it can certainly be a fun thing to explore. I primarily play with that opacity in this sketch here, especially in that distant hill, because of the lighting conditions and just how I wanted those to feel a little bit heavier in the landscape, in contrast with the meadow where I have almost no of the white or no white at all, and that's going to have a much more luminous feel than those trees. And there's some things about this painting that really worked, and I'm still not 100% sure about it, but I think it was fun to include in the collection nonetheless. Let's see, I think that's mostly it for our main colors. There's a few that I will do in the skies, so we can play with one of those briefly, and that's oftentimes just going to be something like cerulean, and we could add our white. In one of the paintings, the little small round brush painting, I do actually add a little bit of rose to my cerulean blue, then also a tiny bit of Hansa yellow medium because I wanted to make some interesting lively grays inside of that sky. And so you can get these beautiful pale purple, slightly grayish yellows. And if you want to, you can even go a little bit higher in concentration in the rose and a little bit more, oh, that yellow was all goopy. Got too much. A little bit higher concentration in the yellow, and then just add a little bit of that blue, and you can get these greens, or you can stay up in that more orangey-ish space. So just fun things to play with. Again, there's no right or wrong answer in terms of how to approach the sky, but I use this stuff right here to give this cloudy area here that very, very slight addition of purple and yellowish hint to it, because that was something very distinctive about that part of the scene. This might be too purpley, but you can play with that. Let's see. The last thing that I did in my paintings is that for some of the colors, like for this sky especially, I really enjoyed having a slight yellow cast to the lower horizon. It was something I noticed early on in my time there that, especially midday to early afternoon, there was definitely some slight bits of yellow there. So the easiest way that I found to do that was to have my white be kind of a starting color along with some water. And I think for that one, I don't remember if it was either quinacridone gold or Hansa yellow medium. That just gets put down, and then we put the cerulean on top of that. And you can see it's going to make a little bit of green, but not too bad. The white helps to moderate and diminish some of that greening effect of having the blue and the yellow together. So that's pretty darn close to what I used in that painting, if I recalled correctly. With 5 paintings, I had to look back at my notes to see exactly what I had, and still might have mixed them up. The last color mixture I didn't really show was just this orange addition here. Again, you can mix your own orange if you don't have quinacridone burnt orange. Otherwise, this mixture here is just dropping that burnt orange directly into that still wet green and yellow area of the painting. Okay, I think that about covers it. We have a whole beautiful page of color mix explorations. I hope that was fun, and I'm excited to share this with you.